I'm Colonel Towner-Watkins, and I'm here with War Hamster Brady for your weekly dose of Operation Gladio meets Secret Societies, focusing initially on Skull and Bones. I noticed your backdrop's a little different, Brady. How are you today?
Well, I am good, and I am in sunny Tucson, Arizona, about 20 miles outside of the city, out in the desert ranch where my dog is visiting my dogs. So you might hear some barking. If the coyotes go by, the dogs will let us know. Since I am traveling, my audio may not be the best, but we'll do the best we can. And let's get to it.
All right.
Well, we're going to take an interesting turn today. As I was researching the regular Skull and Bones members, I started going to the background of one in particular, and we just started noticing some patterns. So, before we jump into that, I was going to ask you about the Tucker Carlson interview with Catherine Austin Fitts. And people, if you haven't seen that yet, it's really a must-watch. She's got a background similar to mine. She's been very successful as a financial advisor and economic issues, very deep researcher. She spent a lot of her career trying to find out who really pulls the puppet strings, who are the paymasters, who calls the shots. And it's one of the in the later part of the interview, she talks about the Harvard endowment. And she thinks it's these people behind the Harvard endowment that are really the decision makers behind, the smoke-filled rooms and everything like that. She goes, if you really know the names, it's probably not the decision makers. And it really runs parallel to what the Colonel and I have been talking about how all the players in all the choke point positions of government seem to come from these private boarding schools, Yale University, Skull and Bones, Harvard Law, and sometimes the Rhodes Scholars. And so I think that video with Tucker and Catherine Fitts is absolutely must watch, but she hits on the exact same themes.
Yeah, I have not had a chance to watch it yet.
She has a website, the Solaris Report, Solaris. I've been subscribed to that for a long time. It's worth reading on a regular basis. You would, I think, if you start watching her, or even reading her, you'll appreciate it quite a bit. She's great.
Well, I've met her. She was here in my hometown.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
Yeah, I've actually met her. I had an opportunity while she was. Hold on. I had an opportunity while she was speaking to talk to her assistant, and she is well read in on Operation Gladio as well.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, she's from Money up in New England. In fact, when one of her uncles got raided by the FBI, that happened to be in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where I live. So she runs originally around New England. I don't know where she is now, but it's got an interesting backstory.
She is in Tennessee and the Netherlands. She travels back and forth between the two.
Okay. Yeah, it was interesting. They had old family money, and I guess with her starting to be controversial, she kind of had to step away from the family interests, but she's doing just fine on her own. And I am jealous that you got to meet her.
Yeah, very exciting.
Right,
well, I know the lady in Florida that is trying to create a Florida state bank and basically go create the model that North Dakota has and basically have a gold fund as well, since we have such a large, what Governor DeSantis refers to as a surplus, which I refer to as overtaxation. But be that what it may, it does bode well for the state of Florida for long-term financial reasons to have their own state bank. And she was here to address that. And we had a lot of politicians from the state of Florida in for that meeting. And I got an invite because my personal friend is leading that effort.
Very good. Yeah, it's interesting. Doug and I did a show a little while back talking about when Trump first floated the executive order about a U.S. sovereign wealth fund. And, we'd gone through all the early executive orders and basically just said, okay, are these constitutional or are they unconstitutional? Not whether they're a good idea or not. And a U.S. national sovereign wealth fund can't be created by the office of the president. It would have to be done through Congress. at the same time, a state bank or state sovereign wealth fund is absolutely constitutional because it is not prohibited in the U.S. Constitution. You just can't mint coin. They just cannot mint coin of any shape or form. In Texas, it was floating the idea of gold-backed currency a number of years back, and that would not have passed the constitutional test. Anyway, shall we jump into our topic of the day?
Jump in.
All right. I do not have a picture of this gentleman because, again, I'm traveling. I didn't have quite as much time. But the skull and bonesman I was starting with for today's session was a guy by the name of William Nordhaus. That's spelled Nordhaus. And he was Skull and Bones class of 1963. Have you heard the name?
No, I not. I'll have to look him up. I don't recognize his name. Hold on just a second. Spell his last name again for me.
Nordhaus. And I'm going to promise you know his work. I guarantee it.
Yeah, no, I recognize the name. Okay.
Okay, well, he jumped off the page at me as I was going down the alphabet with the list. So why do we care about Mr. Nordhaus? Well, he's born in 1941, Albuquerque, New Mexico. His father was a German immigrant, or his grandfather was a German immigrant, moved to New Mexico. He co-founded what's called the Sandia Peak Tramway adjacent to Albuquerque, which I guess is the third longest span in the world. So that's kind of cool. Now, Mr. Dobby Nordhaus, although being from New Mexico, he went to high school at the private Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts.
Okay, tell me the academy again. You kind of faded out there.
The Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts. Now, it's important. There's another Phillips Academy we'll get to. That's the Phillips Academy in Exeter. That's in New Hampshire. And they were founded by two brothers or cousins, and they're kind of rivals, the two. But the one we're talking about today is from Andover. Last few weeks, we've talked about the Horace Mann School. And what was the school we did last week? How do I forget it that quickly? Drawing a blank on who we did last week. So travel will do for you. All right. Anyway, we've been talking about these private high schools, boarding schools, and how they are grooming factories for the Ivy League. And from the Ivy League, they go on to places like the Rhodes Foundation and all kinds of different corners of government. Andover, Phillips at Andover is absolutely no exception to that. And we're going to spend some time on it. So this is founded in 1778. During the Revolutionary War upheaval, most of the Boston schools were closed. Mr. Phillips, who founded it, had a strong Calvinist push. So there was a lot of religious doctrine in this, and a lot of the New England families really liked that, too. They would send their kids there. George Washington would visit the campus in 1789 while he was president, and 8 of his nephews and grandnephews attended Andover.
Oh, wow.
John Hancock signed its Articles of Incorporation.
Wow.
Paul Revere designs its seal and its motto. And the mottos, 2 of them, called Non Sibi, which is not for oneself. And the other one is Finis Origine, which I believe is the end depends on the beginning.
The ends of what?
The end depends on the beginning. That's the motto of the school.
Ooh.
Suggesting, you get strong roots, the tree will grow strong, that kind of idea. And of course, it's the rival of the Phillips School of Exeter, founded by 2 different cousins. So, typical private boarding school, limited number of admissions, all the things you'd expect. But let's talk about some of their alumni, because these guys have been around since the beginning of our country. Going in alphabetical order again. First one was Joseph Carter Abbott. He was a Union Army general in the Civil War. This one's going to be very familiar to you. William M. Alexander, class of 1887. His grandfather was the same William Patterson Alexander we talked about before, who was a missionary in Hawaii. And of course,
Okay.
And they're related to William DeWitt Alexander, who's a Skull and Bonesman, who's the surveyor of Hawaii. So
Holy crap.
I told you this is going to go back to some old themes. You want to those who haven't heard us before, you want to talk about why Hawaii is so funny?
Well, for the reason that Hawaii in William Bloom's book, Killing Hope, kind of sets the stage for the imperialistic nature of America, where we think that the imperialists all originated from Europe and that the United States was not involved in that at all, except for the fact that we've been involved in it in William Bloom's book, beginning with Hawaii, in which there were a lot of missionaries sent over to Hawaii that decided being missionaries was not all it was hyped to be, and they began buying up farmland over there in the form of sugar plantations. And when the United States changed the duties on sugar imports, Hawaii was not part of the United States. So a group of them, to include these guys, went together and basically came to the United States and petitioned the Secretary of State to send the Navy over, because they were going to depose the recently anointed queen and take over the island. And they were going to make a deal with the United States that they were going to be a protectorate, a territory of the United States. And they did just that. The Secretary of State organized a Marine expedition, a Navy expedition, over to the island of Hawaii, sitting off the coast in full visibility, as they cooed and deposed the queen in order to take over Hawaii. So this is one of the very beginnings, not that we hadn't done it before, but this started a new trend that we're basically going to take over territories. And of course, Hawaii was great for the Navy as a stopping point and all of these other things. And so it is kind of a hallmark moment in time of the United States entrance into imperialism.
Very much so. And we need to say that Sullivan and Cromwell were over there beforehand, setting the groundwork legally. Our favorite law firm.
Yeah.
So would it shock you if Mr. Alexander, alumni of Andover, owned sugar plantations in Hawaii?
I'm sorry?
Where do you think? Would it shock you if to learn that he owned sugar plantations?
No, I recognize his name. Yeah.
Yeah. So where do you think he went to college?
Yale.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's interesting. The Phillips School of Andover in Massachusetts, that was the feeding tube for Yale, and the Phillips School in Exeter was a feeding route to Harvard. So that's where the rivalry comes in. So this guy went to Yale. Later on, he'd be on the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. And, he was on the board of trustees for something known as the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace,
which was really named the International Committee for War, not Peace. But yeah.
No, and it's just, we've only had about a dozen other people that worked for that, in the last few weeks. And the last thing he did was interesting. Was he's on the board of trustees for Stanford University. Checking a few boxes.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. All right, next guy we have starts a theme here. You know how we always said if you really want to control society, one of the things you have to control is the media.
Yep.
So let's keep track of that theme as we go down this list. Jonathan Alter, class of 1975, is a senior editor and columnist at Newsweek.
Oh, of course, a CIA front.
We have Willow Bay, 1981, CNN news anchor. Here's a fun one. Bill Belichick, class of 71, the New England Patriots coach.
Oh my gosh.
And he's in the news this week because apparently he's got a 24-year-old honey now that he's coaching at North Carolina, I think. took a college job, and now he's dating a woman who's young enough to be his great-granddaughter. So good job, Bill. Next one on the list is a John Berman, class of 1990. Oh, he's a senior news anchor at CNN. So that's 2 CNN so far out of 1 high school. Next name we get is Hiram Bingham III, who we've talked about on this show. The Bingham family, one of the oldest blue blood families in New England. And this is the one who's the explorer who rediscovered Machu Picchu. He went to school there.
Wow.
We've got a David B. Birney, who was also a Union general. So this school's now produced 2 of the Union's generals in the Civil War. Here's a fun one. Humphrey Bogart went there.
I see a lot of Hollywood, which we know CIA too. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean that's I'm glad you picked up on that, because I left Humphrey Bogart in that. They really do, a lot of Hollywood stars come from the same backgrounds. It's not just rags to riches story very often. All right, we're going to spend some time on this next one. Class of 1959 was Paul Bremer. Was it Bremer or Bremer?
Oh,
Bremer.
Yeah.
Someone we know and love. So why is he important? Well, he was the administrator for the Coalition Provisional Authority of Iraq after a 2003 invasion. Interestingly enough, his father was the president of Christian Dior Parfum. So Paul Bremer went to Andover, then to Yale, was not Skull and Bones. Then he got his Harvard MBA. He then went to school at a place called the Institut d'études politiques de Paris. Remember that name, because we're going to have it at the IDPD, whatever. I can't speak French at all, obviously. That's a French number of universities that study poli-sci. But, when you start talking about globalism and the Eurocentric politics, this guy would be someone who was educated in that school. So he joins the Foreign Service. First is assigned to a place called Kabul, Afghanistan. And then he gets sent to Malawi. It's in the late 60s. So a couple of hotspots of political activity. Then from 1972 to 76, he's the assistant to none other than Henry Kissinger himself. And he was there with Kissinger for the end of the Yom Kippur War in 73. He moves on, becomes a special assistant to Secretary of State Alexander Haig under Reagan in 1981. Reagan then appoints him as an ambassador at large for counterterrorism and the coordinator for counterterrorism in 1986. Why is that such an important year for him to be in that position?
Because that is the belly button. As a matter of fact, the long post that I just posted today outlines all of the CIA people that are involved in that cell. John Brennan was there. That's the hotspot in the United States for coordinating the CIA's creation of terrorism, not a counterterrorism activity. It coordinates all of that.
And there's a guy from one of our private exclusive grooming boarding schools gets put in that position. Because why wouldn't he? Okay, then he goes into the private sector temporarily and becomes the director at what's called Kissinger and Associates, a consulting firm that Kissinger did to make his money on the side. 99, he gets appointed chair of the National Commission on Terrorism. 1999, interesting timing.
Yeah, right before 9/11.
Exactly. Now, I'm glad you bring that up, because he was the chairman of Marsh McClanahan's Marsh Crisis Consulting, which is the risk and insurance services firm. And Marsh McClanahan had an office in the World Trade Center 2 floors above where the plane hit, where they had 1,700 employees in the North Tower. Now, I'm not saying there's any relation there, but I'm also not saying it.
Right.
Fair enough? All right, then he, After surviving 9/11, he gets on the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Science and Technology for Countering Terrorism. And they came out with a paper, Making the Nation Safer, the Role of Science and Technology in Countering Terrorism.
Which is the massive surveillance effort to control all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, and Bremer's behind that. So he arrives in Iraq in May 2003, and he first became famous for saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, we got them," when they killed Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
And that's a funny internet meme these days. People use it all the time. So then he becomes the chief executive authority in Iraq. Of course, did a splendid job. The Coalition Provisional Authority was considered the most powerful foreign post held by any American since MacArthur in Japan. Yeah. And he could rule by decree.
Correct.
A couple of his decrees that we've felt the fallout from. One is he banned the Ba'ath Party in all forms. That was Saddam Hussein's political party. And then he dismantled the Iraqi army. What were the results of those two things?
The total destruction of Iraq.
Yeah, a total void of any kind of order, law, or anything. And that's really what we got what we got today. Hotbed of all kinds of terrorism, simply because Bremer was terrible at his job. Or maybe he was very good at it. Might have been by design. Where are we? So United Nations resolution. Go ahead.
Let me just say this. It's definitely by design, because by keeping Iraq in a constant state of turmoil, they were able to try to do regime change in Syria. They were able to destabilize Iran. They were able to destabilize all of the Kurdish populations in the north. It was 100% by design. And it also, just so everybody knows the context of this, part of the Israeli plan, of which Frank Luntz and Paul Nitz, I believe, wrote the quote unquote PR plan in order to sell all of the destabilization efforts to the American people. There was actually a plan, a public relations plan to sell American on his role in the destabilization of Iraq.
Yeah, and Bremer's running point on all this stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, it gets even uglier there. United Nations Resolution 1483 gave Bremer oversight on Iraqi oil revenue. And what they did is they repaired all the wellheads and the pipelines. Somehow they were stalled repairing the meters. So there's no way to keep accounting of where the Iraqi oil shipments went. And a lot of people don't think that was a coincidence. 2 days before leaving Iraq, Bremer issues an order giving all military and civilian contractors immunity from Iraqi law. And we know the kind of shenanigans that were going on there.
In all venues, as far as murder. I mean, they basically implemented a Phoenix-style program on Iraqi civilians. Exactly.
And now they all get a get-out-of-jail-free card. He gave them all a pardon. And most of his staff leaves with him. So you can't audit anything because they took their records with them. So everything that happened in Iraq, we don't even know, the half of it.
Right. And you had all of the torture places, Abu Ghraib, all of that stuff that was basically replicated from Vietnam.
Yeah. Newt Gingrich called him the, what's the quote, the largest single disaster of an American foreign policy in modern times.
Yep.
He gets questioned before Congress in 2007 about the $8.8 billion in missing funds. And that money never did turn up, did it?
Nope.
And he's a supporter of the continued occupation of Afghanistan, and you will be shocked to know that he is a board member of the IRI.
No, I would not, but yeah.
Yeah, he's the International Republican Institute, basically the Republican side of the CIA.
Correct. That is the one that for 25 years, John McCain ran and did regime change with hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of his tenure.
Well, that's Mr. Bremer, alumni of the just nice, innocent private boarding school in Andover. All right, next name on the list. Guy by the name of Michael Burlingame, class of 1960. He's a very famous Lincoln historian. And if you want the official version of Lincoln, the one that's not true, you go read Burlingame. He'll tell you he grew up in a log cabin and was Honest Abe and saved the Union, none of which is technically true. So I had to put him on there because I can't stand the guy. He's one of those mainstream historians that rewrites history. Another fun name on there, Edgar Rice Burroughs, one of my favorite authors as a kid. He's class of 1894. You know, Edgar Rice Burroughs actually deserves another comment because one of the things that he wrote about was the noble savage. And that concept came in with the Fabians in the 20th century. So when you get all these, I don't want to call them tree huggers, these people, you know, all the reparations crew, that, you know, the native Indians are always the good ones and everything like that, and they never did anything wrong. That's the noble savage concept that Edgar Rice Burroughs popularized. It's part of the whole Fabian socialist movement. He contributed to it. Oh, next three names are that went to high school here are George H.W. Bush, his son George W. Bush, and of course Jeb Bush. All went to this private high school.
Wow.
Same school that Paul Bremer went to. Bush gets us into Iraq and Bremer cleans up the mess. Do you think that's any coincidence there?
I don't think it's a coincidence at all.
Yeah. So now you understand why this school needed some more attention. We talk about secret societies.
Wow.
Here's one. Lincoln Chafee, we've talked about before, class of 1971, who would become the Rhode Island governor and senator. And he comes from a family of skull and bonesmen.
Yikes.
We've got Otis Chandler, class of 46. He was a publisher of the Los Angeles Times.
Okay.
We have Susan Shearer, 1976, who's an editor at the New York Times.
Oh my gosh.
The school's not that big. All right. This one is going to be fun. A guy by the name of Chow Son Chow. And I knew I'd seen this name before, so I looked into it.
Hold on.
He was
hold on. Hold on. You blanked out. Say his name again.
Chow Son Chow. Shouson. The last name is Chow. Chow.
Okay.
He's Andover class of 1881. His father was the comprador of Canton and Hong Kong Steamship Company. This is back in the glory days of the British colonialism in Hong Kong, right before during the Opium Wars, basically.
I was going to say, if he owns ships out of Hong Kong, he's in the opium trade.
Yeah. So this kid Chow Son, his dad was all part of that. He was the third of a group of Chinese students sponsored by the Qing dynasty government to go to the U.S. in the 1870s. He would then go on to Columbia University, but got recalled. So he becomes president of the China Merchant Steam Navigation Company. Later in his career, he becomes the Customs and Trade Superintendent and Counselor for Foreign Affairs of the country of China from 1907 to 1910. He'd leave the government after the 1911 revolution. In 1918, he founds the Bank of East Asia. Now, why is that interesting? We've talked about the Chinese banks and the opium trade and everything like that. This guy's involved in that. 1926, the guy becomes the first Chinese member of the Executive Council of Hong Kong and gets knighted by England in 1933. So he's a British knight, went to school in the United States.
Well, that's what happens to all opium dealers. They become British knights, right?
Apparently. During the Japanese occupation of Hong Kong, it says he joins the Chinese Cooperative Council. Basically, those are the people that were working with the Japanese to, try to maintain some order, whatever. But he suffered no penalties from the Chinese afterwards. No penalties at all. So he's had a very interesting career. I would say he ended up as a bit of a spy, or I'd say more even a counter spy. But interesting for a guy who just went to this small little private high school in Massachusetts.
Holy crap.
Yeah. Next name we have on here is a guy by the name of George Church, class of 72. He is the professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. What do we know about him? He got a degree from Duke in zoology and chemistry in only 2 years. So he's a genius.
Okay, hold on. So zoology. Now, let me just say this, especially since you said he's a geneticist. So this is the stuff that Epstein was funding. He was funding an entire medical initiative thanks to his financial backers sitting at Harvard, working at MIT as well. And so this is huge, actually. And it goes back to the Fabian Society. All of those people that were doing the how do you kill a bunch of people and the interbreeding of people, all were from the veterinarian science, zoology sciences, and not human science. This is critical.
Yeah, eugenicists. And of course, we know that they basically just cloned a woolly mammoth that's been extinct for 10,000 years. They're doing that work. That really does scare the hell out of me.
Right.
Imagine seeing Jurassic Park and thinking that was a good idea. He's on the National Science Foundation Fellowship. He is on the advisory board of the BGI group. And that group is designated a Chinese military company by the U.S. Department of Defense. So he's doing all this research for a company now, while working for Harvard, that is considered a Chinese military operation.
Holy crap.
Yeah. Remind me where COVID came from? Yeah. All right. Next name we have here. Worth mentioning, a guy by the name of Raymond Clevenger, class of 1955. He's a judge for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. My old buddy, William Sloane Coffin, 1942, went to school there. Sloane Coffin, of course, was from the Coffin family, old New England family, and a member of Skull and Bones.
So are you going to... Go ahead, sorry.
No, I was going to say, one of the very first families we talked about were the Coffins. So
are you going to talk about Harlan Cleveland?
I wasn't.
All right.
Go ahead.
I have to bring him up. Harlan Cleveland alumni was the LBJ post JFK's assassination, which I firmly believe was ran out of NATO. And he was the U.S. ambassador to NATO for LBJ. He was also involved in the International Organization of Affairs for the State Department. He was the president of the University of Hawaii. Oh, and look, he's a Rhodes Scholar and Oxford grad.
Checks a few boxes.
This is freaking crazy. Okay, go ahead.
It's almost like they have a guidance counselor sitting at these schools and saying, okay, these are the things you want. If you want to become the master spy someday, these are the different things you have to do. And they all follow the same career path. All right, good catch on that one. Oh, yes. Here's a fun one. John Darnton, class of 1960. He was a Pulitzer Prize foreign correspondent for the New York Times.
Oh, my gosh.
His father was a New York Times correspondent who was killed off of New Guinea during World War II. So John here, in 1976, he goes abroad to Africa to cover Africa out of Lagos, Nigeria. gets expelled from there by the military government in 1977, and then he has covered the following: the protests in South Africa, the liberation movement in Rhodesia, the guerrilla fighting in Ethiopia, Somalia, Zaire, and the fall of Idi Amin in Uganda.
Okay, so that's CIA, 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 CIA.
No, but I told you, he's a foreign correspondent for the New York Times. He couldn't possibly
He's
be
the
CIA.
He's the CIA mouthpiece covering all of the CIA coups, is what you just said.
Exactly.
Okay.
If so, he's another one of our Forrest Gumps that just shows up in the strangest places. In 79, and he got a Pulitzer Prize for all this, by the way. In 79, he's based in Warsaw, Poland, covering Eastern Europe, and he gets a Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of Poland under martial law.
Wow.
He wrote some books,
and
too.
Of course, that's at the time when Poland was trying to negotiate the exit from the Soviet Union. Yeah, this is just crazy. This is crazy, with the CIA's help, of course.
Yep. And of course, the CIA's got its biggest base anywhere in the world is now in Poland, which happens to be right next door to Ukraine. So no coincidence there. All right, so this guy wrote books. And, well, you're not going to believe what he wrote books about. How about cloning?
Oh, my gosh.
Life extension. Wrote about artificial intelligence all the way back in 2002. Human consciousness and the Darwin conspiracy.
So he's the predictor of the things to come that they're all working on.
Apparently. All right. He's got a brother named Robert Darnton, 3 years older, Andover class of 1957. He's a historian also. Went to Harvard and was a Rhodes Scholar. Again. And he's best known as being the president of the American Historical Association. And that is an important position. We always talk about how they rewrite our history, and it's not what they say, it's what they leave out. And this guy is the president of one of the biggest associations that's doing all that, the brother of the CIA spy we just discussed.
And the brother was sponsored by the Mellon Foundation, which is another CIA front. I find them in funding a whole bunch of the nefarious things.
Yeah, and that's why you see the Carnegie Mellon combination on so many different things. The Carnegie family, of course. Yeah.
Holy moly.
Well, those are your Darntons. All right, this next name is one of my favorite people of all time. Norman Dodd, class of 1918. We're going to talk about him a lot more when we start talking about the foundations. This is the guy who was the head investigator for the Reese Committee, looking into foundations. And if you listen to this guy talk, you can find his interviews, and we're gonna spend some time on Norman Dodd. I did not know he went to this school, but apparently he did. He's one of the good guys, though.
Wow.
All right. Next name is a guy by the name of Tim Draper. And everybody in my business knows that name because he's a very famous venture capitalist, founder of Draper Fisher Jerviston, or whatever it's called, DFJ. And he's one of the initial investors in the following: Baidu, Hotmail, Skype, Tesla, SpaceX, AngelList, SolarCity, Ring, Twitter, DocuSign, Coinbase, Robinhood, Twitch, Ancestry.com, and he lost his shirt in Theranos. And he's also the guy that bought the Bitcoin that the government had seized from the Silk Road seizure. So that is a very famous venture capitalist.
Oh, wait a minute. Go over them again.
We got Baidu. Stop me when you want me to. Hotmail, Skype, Tesla, SpaceX, Elon Musk, AngelList, SolarCity, Ring, Twitter, DocuSign, Coinbase, Robinhood, Twitch, Ancestry.com, and Theranos.
So this guy is an initial investor on everything that they are using today to collect your data, is what you're telling me.
Yeah.
Okay.
You've got the Ancestry.com. You've got the social media. You've got the Robinhood app, investment app. Yeah, he's been in all of that.
Wow. Skype. So they can literally spy on everything.
Mm-hmm.
DocuSign, so they know who's buying what. Okay. All right. Keep going.
All right. That's it for Mr. Draper. Very wealthy guy. I had to put this one in there. Sam Endicott, class of 92, just because he's the lead singer for one of my favorite bands, The Bravery. Sorry. I go off topic when I see something like that. Okay. David Enzor, class of 1969. What's he? Oh, he's a CNN correspondent. Are we up to 4 CNN now?
Oh my gosh.
We had John Murray Forbes, who was a railroad magnate from that Forbes family, same Forbes family. It's been all over the place, the old Boston Brahmin family. He was involved in Burlington Railroads, and he was involved with, we've talked about this before, Russell and Company, the China trading house. Another Hong Kong connection. We've got a Jeffrey Garten, class of 64. He's now the dean of the Yale School of Management.
Which is the other thing that, so just to be clear, I made this point earlier, so I want to make it again. The Yale guy went to either Harvard Law or Harvard School of Management.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And if we remember, the guy who founded the Yale School of Management was none other than Skull and Bonesman, William H. Donaldson, who we've talked about before.
Yes, exactly.
Oops. Okay. Next name I have is an A, Bartlett Giamatti, also known as Bart Giamatti, baseball commissioner and the president of Yale University. John Campbell Greenway, 1895. He was an Army general, one of the Rough Riders, and was described as an intel officer with the Office of Naval Intelligence. Would then go on to become a mining magnate. So early intelligence guy from 1895.
And keep in mind that the mining expeditions during this time was what they were using as the intelligence apparatus to go around and scout all of the places that they wanted to have coups and take over so that they could gather all of the resources under their control.
Yeah, the very first United States intelligence agency was the Navy. Was from the Navy. It was to find out the plans of this new weapon of mass destruction known as a battleship. All right, the next name I have on here is a James Greenway, 1926. He was known as the curator for the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Harvard. And he was the lieutenant commander of the U.S. Navy intelligence officer with the Office of Naval Intel.
So, and let me make this point because this came up in my research. The Office of Navy Intelligence created their own Task Force 157 that went around and mapped all of the harbors everywhere. So the entire world. And that's what Edwin Wilson was involved in, who was later put in prison by the CIA. He was a weapons seller to Libya. And so he created a front company for the CIA, and then the CIA wanted someone else running that company. So they imprisoned him, Edwin Wilson. And this is critically important because they used the Office of Naval Intelligence under the guise of mapping harbors for ports for the Navy. But what they were really doing is figuring out how they could control these ports. And
from this one private high school, we've got several connections to ONI, Officer of Naval Intelligence, and this guy is also in charge of the Museum of Zoology. And we just talked about this geneticist that started with zoology again. So that's, I don't know. Something odd. Next name we have is a Roderick Stephen Hall, 1934. He was an OSS agent, murdered by the SS murdered by the SS in 1945. This guy's got an interesting story. He was born in Beijing, spent an international life, volunteered for the OSS or for the Army when the war broke out, and gets immediately, because it was international, multiple languages, gets moved in the OSS. Dropped behind enemy lines. He was worried about what's called the Brenner Pass. And, oh, by the way, he was Yale educated, of course. But the Germans captured him behind enemy lines when they were trying to keep the Brenner Pass open, and he would end up being murdered while he was interrogated. So he might have died a hero. All right, who else goes to this exclusive high school breeding ground? None other than Brian Henson, the son of the Muppets puppeteer Jim Henson.
The son of who?
Jim Henson from the Muppets.
Oh, Jim Henson. Okay.
Yes. And Brian now runs the Muppets. So, and they're up to no good.
So they're programming our kids.
Yeah, you can't trust those Muppets. Oliver Wendell Holmes went there in 1825. That's kind of cool. One of the great writers in American history. Chris Hughes, 2002, co-founder of Facebook, which makes perfect sense. Then, of course, we've got Robert Ingersoll, the former U.S. Deputy Secretary of State under both Nixon and Ford, who is a trustee of the Aspen Institute of Humanistic Studies.
Of course he is.
Yes, which is basically Spook Central, right?
Yes.
What's also interesting is he was the director of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. For those who don't know, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is the biggest lobbyist group on the Republican side, GOP, and they do not, their name is they're supposed to be representing all businesses. No, they are the ones who carve out trade deals for the multinational corporations. They do this hand in hand with the intelligence agencies. Chamber of Commerce are not good players. They very much oppose Trump's agenda.
And they have their own slush fund next to the IRI under the National Endowment for Democracy.
Yeah. Chamber of Commerce is not a good they are bad actors, in my opinion. All right, that's Mr. Ingersoll. Next name on here, class of 1979. How about JFK Jr.? His cousin, I believe, Max Kennedy, went there but got expelled. And Patrick Kennedy, the U.S. rep from Rhode Island, also went there.
Wow.
Keeping it in the family, how about Vanessa Carey, the daughter of John Kerry, Skull and Bones? And she's up to something interesting. It's worth looking into. She does something called Seed Global Health, which is affiliated with spreading, I think, nursing around the world. They work with the Peace Corps.
Oh, yeah, she definitely needs to be looked into because that's not good.
Yeah, that's spelled Seed, SEED, Global Health. So anybody wants to do the dig on that, feel free. I did not have time.
Yep.
I just wonder where they're doing most of their activities. And I bet we could guess without even looking.
I bet it overlays Operation Gladio really well.
Yeah, well, it's a newer organization, so.
Well, they're still doing it. They're still doing overthrows.
All right, next name we have, of course, we got some royalty here. How about a Prince Rahim Aga Khan? This is a guy who went there in 1990. This guy's descended from Shia royalty, apparently direct descendant of Muhammad himself.
Okay, so do you have more on Khan?
No, I didn't want to go into the detail on that because I don't
let
jump
me
into religion.
Yeah, let me remind everybody, Khan, this family, was front and center in the World Wildlife Fund because they billed themselves as environmentalist philanthropist. He was one of the major funders of the World Wildlife Fund. He was an original member of the 1001 Club, and he also was part of they have a whole bunch of hotels, like these quote unquote eco-friendly hotels, and they would put them in places like the Serengeti and run off all of the indigenous people, and then take tour buses through the indigenous camps that they set up with lean-tos and have the indigenous people dance for the tourists that now occupy their old houses or their old homelands. This is that con.
And let's see, I think he's like the 50th in the line of descendant, the 50th descendant. But fun stuff. All right, moving on. Someone named Chentung Liang Cheng, who would become the Chinese ambassador to the United States, went to high school at Andover.
So they came here to go to school. They go back to China and then come here as the ambassador to China.
Yeah, and then they're networked with all the other muckety-mucks who went to this school.
Correct.
So that's how you get backdoor deals done. Class of 1968, I've got a guy by the name of I. Lewis Scooter Libby.
Scooter Libby. Oh, God.
Chief of Staff to Dick Cheney, who's indicted for the leak of CIA's own Valerie Plame. That's Scooter Libby.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess Trump didn't pardon him. He basically, what's the word? He commuted his sentence, though. So, oh, here's a fun one. Guy by the name of Vance C. McCormick. He would be an All-American quarterback. Went to Yale. No skull and bones that we can tell. Became a publisher. Was political. Somehow became the chairman of the DNC from 1916 to 1919. And I'll remind you, Democrats got wiped out in 1920 in the election. But somehow, this guy was the leader of the American delegation at the Treaty of Versailles. And we know some of the other people that were on that delegation, including the Dulles brothers, who go on found the CIA. Yep. That's a Vance C. McCormick. And I don't know how he got the job as the leader of the delegation. He
probably going to this school.
Perhaps, because he doesn't have any other credentials that really would suggest that that's a role.
He is definitely one of the inside guys.
And that's the Treaty of Versailles, where they basically carved up the entire world.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, under the worst president ever, Woodrow Wilson.
All right, that's Mr. McCormick. I'm trying to remember, was his name in the Old Boys? Do we see that name? We must have seen it a bunch. I said it was familiar.
I don't have that book in here.
All right, well, I'll look for it next time. I got to do a reread of the book anyway, so I'll look for the name again.
Yes, I do. Right here, The Old Boys. Hold on, I'll look it up real quick.
Yeah, let us know if you see McCormick.
All right, keep going.
I've got a John U. Monroe, M-O-N-R-O, who's the dean of Harvard. I've got a William Henry Moody, 1871, who would become a U.S. Supreme Court justice. Of course, Samuel Morse, class of 1805, the inventor of the Morse code. That's very cool. Class of 1997, Massachusetts Congressman Seth Moulton.
Oh, he is in here. He is in here.
He is?
He is.
Yeah, I knew that's where I thought that's where I'd seen the name.
Yeah, Vance McCormick. It says, let's see. They're talking about Secretary of State Lansing, and says they talk about Christian Harder remained cordial and tolerant to the academians, and there were dinners at on Allen's tab, as well as lunches at the Rit, which Allen discreetly brought Vance McCormick and his uncle Robert together with the better disposed Seymour. So, yeah, he definitely is in here.
Robert Lansing is the Secretary of State, who's also the uncle of the Dulles brothers, one of which would become the next Secretary of State, if you want to know how incestuous our foreign policy is. So, yep.
Correct.
All right,
Yeah.
moving on.
But again, all of these people are at the Versailles that this seemingly unqualified guy is there as well.
Yep. And most of the people, U.S. delegation are a bunch of academics from the Ivy League.
Oh, he also ran the War Trade Board. Vance McCormick did. It
What
says
year?
he was the abrasive harvester heir who supervised the DNC. So he's the heir to the International Harvester money.
Okay. Well, speaking of heirs to money, speaking of heirs, we got a class of 1990, someone by the name of Lachlan Murdoch, son of Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah. Okay.
So we've got someone named James David Olin, class of 1992, who's now the dean of the Cornell Law School. A lot of deans of Ivy League schools coming out of this one high school, huh?
And that means that they control everything. But it also probably means they're part of the CIA, because the CIA uses all of these particular schools as recruiting ground.
Bingo.
Oh my gosh.
That's the exact connection I was trying to make.
Oh my gosh.
You familiar with a what's the word? Acoustical band called Pentatonics?
No.
One of their singers went to this school, Kevin Olusola. I like Pentatonics. They do a version of the Little Drummer Boy that I play every year. There's a Peter Pelagian, son of a Lebanese real estate investor. He's now the CEO of what's called Intercontinental Real Estate Corporation, which manages over $10 billion in private equity real estate. Very successful company.
Which is where the CIA parks their money to clean it.
It's entirely possible that that's one of the conduits. Next name I have is one Katie Porter, the California congresswoman who just lost her bid to become a senator to Adam Schiff. She went to this school.
Holy moly.
We have a Henry Riggs Rathbone, 1887, who became an Illinois congressman, but he's interesting because his parents were sitting with Lincoln when Lincoln was shot.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, funny story.
Holy
and then he would
crap.
go on to become a congressman. There's Charles Ruff, class of 1956, and he's known for being the lawyer who defended Clinton during his impeachment.
Well, of course he was.
Mm-hmm. How about Will Scharf, class of 2004? You know, that Will Scharf, he's the assistant to President Trump. He's part of Trump's
Are we supposed to be hoping that he's one of the good guys?
I don't know.
They haven't produced a lot of good guys, by the way.
Yeah, they just got rid of one today. Or it sounds like they're going to. That probably was announced while we've been on the air.
Walls?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I've got a Robert B. Semple Jr., class of 1954. Of course, he's an associate editor at the New York Times, who got his Pulitzer Prize for his writing on environmental issues.
Of course.
Mm-hmm. We'll talk about the environmental issues in a bit. We had a Peter Plinton Smith, 64, who's the Assistant Director General for Education at UNESCO.
Oh my gosh.
Uh-huh.
Oh my gosh.
How about famous pediatrician Benjamin Spock? Yeah, the Dr. Spock.
That does not surprise me.
Probably the most influential pediatrician of all time.
Yes. In destroying children.
Yeah. Robert B. Stearns, 1906, the founder of Bear Stearns, the now bankrupt investment firm. Yeah, talking about destroying children. You know, these people, they go to these schools, these grooming schools, then they go to Ivy League, and what they're learning is all these progressive versions of reality. This progressive stuff, it's all about transhumanism. All these things are taught at those schools quietly and in the dark, but that's how we get people like Dr. Spock.
Yep.
Yeah, the next one's a fun name we know and love. Henry Stimson.
Yeah.
Skull and Bones, as well as many other things. We don't need to beat up Stimson anymore. We have a Richard K. Sutherland, class of 1911, who becomes a U.S. Army general after going to Yale. 1937, he's commanding a battalion of the 15th Industry in a place called Tientsin, China. What's the Army doing in Tientsin, China in 1937, Colonel?
Not good things.
So in 1938, he serves under MacArthur in the Philippines. And he was
And they're
MacArthur's
doing even worse things there.
And he's MacArthur's chief of staff for the entire war. And he was there for the surrender of Japan. But does that not also mean he was there when they discovered the Operation Golden Lily treasure?
Correct. And the non-Nuremberg accountability of all the war criminals that killed all of the POWs?
Yeah, this guy's there for that. All right, moving on.
He would have also been there then. Does it say how long he was with MacArthur? Because he would have been there for the adopting of Chiang Kai-shek and potentially even the beginning of the Korean War, which is, another false flag.
What I got is he was MacArthur's chief of staff for the entire war. I don't know about after the war.
Okay.
I didn't get any notes on that.
Okay.
Next name we have was, of course, Thomas Thatcher, Skull and Bones, Solicitor General of the United States. We have talked about the Thatcher family before.
Yep.
I've got an Evan Thomas, who is the assistant managing editor at Newsweek.
Another
two or three
CIA
Newsweek?
front. Yeah.
Alexander Trowbridge, 1947, who's the Secretary of Commerce under LBJ. Kind of important position.
It seems like there was a few, right? This is at least the second one under LBJ.
Yeah. All right, this next name I'm not even going to try to pronounce because it's 4 names, but this guy grew up to be the king of Bhutan. I'm not even going to attempt the name. It ends in Wangchuk.
Okay.
All right. The last name we want to talk about that went to this school, the Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, is none other than former director of the FBI, Christopher Wray.
Oh, holy crap.
Well, let's talk about holy crap, Christopher Wray, shall we?
Sure.
Born in New York City, 1966. Goes to college, of course, at Yale. Graduated in 1989. We do not know if he was Skull and Bones, because remember the Bones list ends in 82. He would have been one of the first ones. So we do not know. From there, he went to Yale Law. Joins the government as an assistant U.S. attorney in Georgia in 1997. Spent a couple years out of the government in 2016 and 17, working for a private firm known as King and Spalding. Remember that name?
Yes, I do.
In those 2 years, Christopher Wray earned $9.2 million. In fact, his net worth is estimated to be almost $40 million by the Wall Street Journal. Well, let's go back to this firm, King and Spalding. This is the law firm that advises Donald Trump's real estate empire. And their alumni include a lot of revolving door from government to this firm back and forth. How about Sally Yates, who resigned from Trump's DOJ because she wouldn't enforce the travel ban? How about Rod Rosenstein, is from this firm? Some new people that just joined this firm, just left the Biden administration and now work for this firm. Same firm that's still managing Donald Trump's real estate empire. And I don't know if Christopher Wray is working for them yet or not, but these 3 are. How about Lauren Roth, who came from the FDA? Someone named Nima Melanina, who worked at the State Department, but she focused on cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. Now works for this law firm, where Christopher Wray comes from. And there's another guy, Brian Magirus, who came from the Commerce Department. All back to this firm, where Christopher Wray worked. And they managed Donald Trump's real estate empire, or advised him on it. So, all right.
Can
That's
I
about
add
all I
one?
have on. Yeah,
Can
go
I add
ahead.
one?
Yeah.
The Wrigleys, from the chewing gum Wrigley family. Philip Wrigley graduated from here.
I'm going to skip right over
And
him.
yeah, they're also, well, this name rang a bell for me because of Operation Gladio and the fact that I used to go to Catalina Island all the time when I lived in LA. That was a really cool weekend, kind of take the ferry over type thing. And I learned a lot about the history. There's a lot of history to Catalina Island that's not good. The Wrigley building in Chicago, he spent a lot of time in Chicago. Obviously, was part of the Cubs, the Chicago Cubs um, uh, realm. And if you've ever, I've been to Chicago multiple times. I was stationed in Illinois, been through the part that's public that you can walk through in the Wrigley building only because of my infatuation with architecture and stuff like this. But the Wrigleys have a very nefarious background to some extent with the Chicago mob, and then their role as a quote unquote getaway for Hollywood over on Catalina Island. I'm just shocked again that he comes from the same school.
I've spent a lot of time in Catalina myself. In fact, that's where I saw my first great white shark when I was diving. Yeah, I love it over there.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
All right, let's wrap up. Let's get back to the star of our show, who went to this wonderful school, Mr. Nordhaus. So after he's left the Andover, of course, he goes to Yale. Skull and Bones. He got a BA and an MA from Yale in 1963 and 72. And of course, he then gets his certificate from, once again, the Institut d'études politiques, the French poli-sci group I mentioned earlier, where someone else went. So kind of small world. This high school's got a pipeline to the French. Mm-hmm. Nordhaus would then get his PhD from MIT in 1967. Becomes a visiting fellow at Cambridge in England in 70 and 71. He has been a faculty member of Yale ever since 1967. So that's like longer than I've been alive. He's been at Yale. And he's in two schools there. One is economics, and the other is a school of the environment. And this is the guy that tries to combine those two different schools. He's been on the Brookings panel of economic activity since 1972.
Wow.
We're going to talk about Brookings here in a bit. He was in the Carter administration's Council of Economic Advisors. He would go on to become the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston in 2014 and 15. So this is a very serious economist. And he is a major problem because he's written a bunch of books on global warming and climate change, and he tries to just basically combine that with economics. And the problem with it is he starts with his foregone conclusion and tries to prove it backwards. That's exactly what this guy's done his whole career. His work is used to justify some of these green policies initiatives all over the world. This is the guy, more than anyone else, that has designed those policies. Some of his books, you're going to love these. Managing the Global Commons, The Economics of Climate Change, 1994. How about Warming the World, Economic Models of Global Warming? How about The Climate Casino, Risk, Uncertainty, and Economics for a Warming World? How about The Spirit of Green, The Economics of Collisions and Contagions in a Crowded World? This guy is nothing but a depopulation Malthusian. In 1972, with a fellow Yale professor, James Toman, he published Is Growth Obsolete? And he starts creating all these ways of measuring everything from like the carbon tax and, all that stuff. Most of it comes from this guy. I mean, he's cost the world billions and billions of dollars. There's ridiculous nonsense. First of all, this is Hegelian. The whole point of the whole global warming scare is the resource grab by the elite. So what they do is they create an artificial threat, just like they did with COVID, to make it seem worse. The climate threat, we've got to give more power to the elites. Otherwise, we're all going to die from climate change. And they throw billions of dollars of this, and it's still a giant land grab. Trillions of dollars of money that's going to be made from this resource grab these guys are doing. And it's all based on a BS theory. Because carbon is not a problem.
Correct.
This is the guy justifying it all with economic policies. And he's from Skull and Bones. And the Andover School.
That's just crazy. And so he's best friends with John Kerry.
Oh, gotta be. Absolutely gotta be. All right, let's finish up and just talk about the Brookings Institute, because we're going to spend more time on these institutions, but because this guy is on there, I think we could spend a few minutes on it. This is a think tank that conducts research and education in the social sciences.
Okay, hold on. You forgot your research. Air quotes.
My apologies. University of Pennsylvania says it's been they've got something called the Go-To Think Tank Index Report. Brookings is ranked #1 every year since 2008. So this is the think tank's think tank. It is founded, the Brookings Institute, in 1916 as the Institute for Government Research, the IGR. And its purpose, listen, you're probably going to get some buzzwords that you love. 3 bullet points of purposes. Strengthen American democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, foster economic and social welfare, security, and opportunity for Americans. And secure a more open, safe, prosperous, and cooperative international system.
Okay, so let me rephrase that. Hold on. Make the first point again.
First point is strengthen American democracy.
Which means destroy the republic. Go ahead.
Foster economic and social welfare, security, and opportunity for Americans.
Which means destroy it. Go ahead.
Okay. And 4 is secure a more open, safe, prosperous, and cooperative international system.
Which means we're going to implement one world order. Go ahead.
Globalism. Yeah. Yes. Thank you for that translation.
Sure. I'm getting really good at it.
Yes, you are. The founder was a philanthropist by the name of Robert S. Brookings, lived from 1850 to 1932. He founded 3 organizations. One was the IGR. The other one was the Institute of Economics, which was funded by none other than the Carnegie Corporation. The Carnegie Corporation, yeah, I'll say that again. And then, of course, there was the Robert Brookings Graduate School, which is associated with Washington University in St. Louis. And in 1927, they merged the 3 of those together to become the Brookings Institute. So Brookings Institute rises to fame pretty quickly. FDR commissions them to help understand the causes of the Great Depression. Remember, this is this great think tank that's into economics. And, the Great Depression never ended under FDR. They actually opposed FDR's National Recovery Administration, said it wouldn't work. War breaks out in Europe, and the Brookings Institute does studies on mobilization. They help draw out the plans for U.S. mobilization if we were to enter into the war, as if that was ever a question.
Right.
Then, after the war, they were asked to plan for the European recovery program, and they were basically the ones who designed the Marshall Plan rollout. And
which
how many
of Operation Gladio?
Exactly. And how many skull and bones connections do we have to the Marshall Plan? Just about all of them. A ton.
Yeah.
And again, for those who don't recall, Marshall Plan, the United States never got out of the Great Depression. The war happened. We militarized industrial production, which of course is going to drive your economy, drive up taxes, everything like that. But when the war ended, basically most of the civilized world had been bombed to smithereens. We had 5 or 6 million service members coming back to the States, and they weren't going to have jobs. We were going right back into the Great Depression. So instead of letting that happen, the plan was the Marshall Plan, where basically we print a whole lot of money, send it over to Europe so they could rebuild and buy American products. And that's why America prospered post-World War II. It was the things that caused the Great Depression were never fixed. It's been papered over.
It was basically taking taxpayer dollars that we were going to pay interest on forever and laundering it through the European countries to make the oligarchs in America rich.
Yeah, so our multinational corporations benefited.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And Brookings are the ones that helped implement that. So thanks, guys. Brookings also helped create the whole plan for the United Nations. They're doing so well in 1952, they get gigantic grants from the Rockefeller and Ford foundations.
CIA and CIA.
Exactly. And worse. You want to talk, Rockefeller's behind this whole climate scam thing from day one. That's always been a Rockefeller thing. And I've told that story on the show many times. The Brookings Institute would then create the office of the Congressional Budget Office. And there's a reason for that. So therefore, they get to influence exactly what policies get implemented, because the CBO tells Congress whether something's good or not. It basically allows them to control the purse. Under Nixon, the Brookings Institute's really sweetheart relationship with the Office of the President really soured. And there's a great story where G. Gordon Liddy and his White House plumbers, they're actually going to firebomb the Brookings Institute's headquarters and steal their classified files. And the only reason that plan got canceled was because Nixon would not pay for a fire engine as a getaway vehicle. These are the ones. Yeah, this is a true story from Watergate. The guys who did Watergate were actually going to go bomb the Brookings Institute and steal their material. And then, of course, what else do you know about the Brookings Institute? Oh, one of our favorites, Strobe Talbot, Rhodes Scholar, Bill Clinton's roommate in college, became the president of the Brookings Institute. And under him, the Brookings Institute to the Middle East and India now has offices in Doha, Beijing, and New Delhi, because it is a globalist organization and not about strengthening American democracy. And that is all I have for today.
Well, I know they're in Qatar too, which is obviously a big deal. That's where we ended up putting U.S. Central Command's headquarters was in Qatar. So, they definitely have a worldwide presence.
Yeah, so you're given all this, obviously this is a globalist institution. They've been all about the New World